today's TEDx series is Pivot. And I was very fascinated when I first heard the word pivot because we've used it, as an engineer I know the technical ways that it's used, but we also use it in our regular day-to-day life. And I was fascinated, it's both a noun and a verb. It's a verb in the sense of like pivoting from one place to another. It's also a noun in the sense of like a pivot man, meaning like a leader or a thought leader. So I thought that was fascinating that the word had all these meanings. Now, in my position as an international actor, I am my product and my work. So I just wanted to give you a little background of why this theme pivot has been such an overarching and common through line through my career and life. And I think we can apply this to our lives as well as any of the work projects we're doing and even in our day-to-day social life. When I was prepping to talk about pivot, I thought, okay, let's pull out tidbits from science and business and philosophy and a little bit of esoterics and personal experience. And by no means I'm done pivoting. I'm still learning to pivot, and I'm still pivoting, to this day, trying to find new ways to do things and better ways to do things. My pivot started in Bangalore, where I grew up, and I did my mechanical engineering at BITSBITBangalore, which was a big pivot for me because it was a multicultural environment from all over India. It made me think outside the box. The next pivot came when I went to do my master's at the University of Maryland at College Park, which was an international, kind of an environment. And when you put your heads together with people from other parts of the world, it expands your thinking. You think outside the box and you think of new ways to express yourself and to conceptualize and ideate. After my master's, the other pivot came when I went to the American Conservatory Theatre to do my method acting training. And I used to be a child actor in Bangalore doing theatre, and I've performed at many of the spaces here like Ravindra Kalakshetra and Town Hall, but never did that professionally as a film actor or anything. And I wanted to get proper formal training, and that's why I pivoted and went to the American Conservatory Theatre. I was very inspired by many of my fellow alumni like Denzel Washington and Olympia Dukakis, many of them actually Oscar winners, which I aspire to, and they're big role models for me. When I was in my undergrad at BITSBITBangalore, I had the good fortune also of pivoting into new research areas. I worked with my professor, Dr. Ravi Prakash, on something called biodegradable sutures, which is a reality today. But many years ago, they had to take out stitches after they stitched you for a wound. When I worked at Hindustan Aeronautics and at National Aerospace, I had a lot of interest in material science, and I got to work on the light combat aircraft at NAL. I got to work on the advanced light helicopter, which is a German collaboration. All of these were like interesting pivots for me from mechanical engineering into aerospace engineering, which is why I actually ended up going to the University of Maryland for a PhD in aerospace engineering initially. And I had the good fortune of pivoting again to do projects at NASA, at projects for the US military and Navy, and they were all technically military projects, and that's when I realized, and I was a bit disillusioned that I was building things that were ultimately going to be destructive, and time for another pivot. So I had to pivot out of that, and even though it's wonderful technology in aerospace and there's a lot of public domain use, I decided to finish up a mechanical engineering degree, a master's in electronic packaging. So the overarching theme, like I was talking about in terms of pivot for me, came again when I'm looking at developing myself as an integral human being, not just using my left brain as an engineer or a logical thinker, but also stepping into my right brain and using my creative side, ideation side, original thought creation. That's when I started doing a lot of marketing and business development in Silicon Valley in San Jose, California. That's the time when I used to MC a lot of events, and I was approached to participate in something called Mr. India California and Mr. India America. These are like talent competitions, and I performed my acting segments. This was before my formal training at American Conservatory Theatre, and that led me to a whole new, pivoting into a career in modeling and acting, into film and TV. That's when I realized, I should get proper, formal training, and that's why I went to the acting course. Now, during all of this, I realized, being a public figure, being in the public eye, it's a great way to promote important social causes. That's when I got involved with philanthropic organizations like Indus and Save Our Child. They're all children's NGOs or non-profits, as we call them. And the different things that I do, even today, I mean, I've not given up my engineering or technical side of my thinking. I still consult occasionally. I still have a deep interest in technology and all this. The whole idea being about integrating my right and left brain thinking. And there's a layer in the brain called the corpus callosum, which is the layer that separates the left and right brain. It's the integrating factor between the left and right brain. So one of the concepts that fascinated me about self-improvement or personality development is this concept of Renaissance man. And I mean that in a general neutral way, like a Renaissance person. Comes from obviously 16th century Renaissance and the French Revolution, literally means rebirth. So I think it's very important for us to keep pivoting and rebirthing ourselves in our lives, in our social lives, in our work lives, so that we're constantly on the cutting edge and utilizing all of the resources of our brain. One of the things I want to talk about quickly is one of my favorite poets is Rainer Maria Rilke, who's an Austrian bohemian poet and author. And the quote you see on the screen, "The future enters into us in order to transform itself in us long before it happens." It is a very significant quote because many times we think about standing here in the present and pivoting to the future, thinking, oh, there's all these obstacles and I don't know how to do it. Instead, this quote, is one of the ways of saying, when you're in the present, you actually visualize yourself in the future. Already you're pivoted, and then you work backwards in your planning and your steps that you want to accomplish. And that makes it very easy because your brain is thinking in a different way. It's not the same way you would think going uphill with obstacles. It's more like it's an easy path of going backwards from where you've already accomplished to where you are now. One of my other favorite quotes is Wayne Gretzky, the Canadian ice hockey player. He says, "I am where the puck will be, not where it is." So, and he's a very renowned and accomplished hockey player. So he's talking about how we have to put ourselves in the future to come to what we want to accomplish from the present. One of my other favorite quotes, bear with all the quotes, these are the things I could put together in preparing for Pivot. John Keats says, "The only means of strengthening one's intellect is to make up one's mind about nothing, to let the mind be a thoroughfare for all thoughts." Stephen Covey, in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says, "Begin with the end in mind." And I want to touch upon a word which is important here, along with pivot, is decision. Decision from its classical root comes from decidere, meaning to cut off. So we're standing in the present and we want to pivot to the future. We actually have to let some part of us die so we can be reborn into the new self we're creating for ourselves. Part of doing that is also not to be judgmental either about the past or the present or the future. You have to stay open to possibilities. And one of the things I'd like to point out is, I love this visual of a 4-quadrant thing. There's the first quadrant, which is things you know that you know. Second quadrant, things you know that you don't know. Third quadrant, things that you don't know that you know. Things you don't know that you don't know. That 4th quadrant is actually the key to pivoting and self-improvement and exponential results. The 4th quadrant I was talking about, things you don't know that you don't know, is also what are called blind spots, because you don't even know to ask the right question, which is where I think the highest potential for growth is. I'm a student of Sanskrit. I studied it for many years. There's something called the frog in the well aphorism, which we've heard of, talked about. And frog in the well, thinks the whole universe is the well and he's the king and he doesn't need to do anything else. The frog in the ocean knows that's not true. So pivoting requires that openness to discovering a new milieu and a new environment and a new box that is bigger than your current box. We are pivoting in life, in our work, whether we like it or not, whether we are aware of it or not. Isn't it better to be aware and like it so that you have to anyway do it, you're doing it consciously? One of the things around Renaissance man that I wanted to talk about is this concept of brain plasticity. There's a lot of neurological research that the human brain continues to grow at all ages, not just until you're 20 or 30. So one of the heartening things about that is you can learn a new language, a new skill. You can change your attitude about things very easily. It's actually a physical, encephalic process. It's not something that is just, out in the ether or like in your mind. It's an actual physical process where the dendritic structures and neuronic structures actually form, and you can actually change yourself. With acting, I look upon my work as an actor to be present and to be, do and have, as we talk about in ontology. And one of the scientific concepts I want to talk about in terms of just achieving our goals and how the body works in terms of the brain, there's something called the reticular activating system. And there's an article that I'm going to just read off a section of from the Scientific American from May 1957. It describes the discovery of the reticular formation at the base of the brain. This is basically the gateway to your conscious awareness. In other words, it acts as a switch of sorts to turn on your perceptions of ideas and data, the things that keep you asleep even when music is playing, but wakes you up if a special little baby cries in the other room. I'm going to stay away from New Age definitions generally as per TED guidelines, but there are esoteric and other philosophical approaches to this thing of accomplishing what you want, pivoting from your present to your future. Topics around law of attraction and manifestation and quantum mechanics, which we're going to stay away from, but they're very interesting things to explore as well. There's a journal article from the National Institute of Health that I wanted to talk about quickly on this topic is consciousness is an arousal and awareness of environment and self, which is achieved through action of the ascending reticular activating system on the brain stem and cerebral cortex. The science behind this is solid, is why I'm quoting all this scientific literature. And just stepping to philosophy for a second, Anais Nin, who's a very famous French essayist, she had a very beautiful way of saying this. She says, we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. Now that's profound, because we only have this filter and this frame of what we look out into the world, whereas there is a reality that is outside of that we need to become aware of. David Allen, in his famous book, Getting Things Done, if you're familiar with it, he talks about this process, and I'm going to just read a little excerpt from it and credit to David Allen for that. Just like a computer, your brain has a search function. But it's even more phenomenal than a computer's. It seems to be programmed by what we focus on, and more primarily, what we identify with. It's the seat of what many people have referred to as the paradigms we maintain. We notice only what matches our internal belief systems and identified contexts or paradigms. If you're an optometrist, for example, you'll tend to notice people wearing eyeglasses all across the room in even a crowded big room. And if you're a building contractor, you might notice the fine details of the texture of the wall or the material being used. A simple exercise you can try for yourself is, let's say you focus on the color red today. I mean, it's a dark room here, it's hard to do it now, except maybe you can look at the red dot I'm standing on and all the beautiful red here. But if you try it later in the day, you just think of red for maybe 30 seconds to say, okay, red, the color. You will see all kinds of strange things, even small patches of red jumping out at you. That is just the RAS at work, the reticular activating system. Merlin Principle is something I want to quickly touch upon. In T.H. White's book, The Once and Future King, The Story of King Arthur, Merlin, as you know, was a legendary magician who helped King Arthur, ascend to his throne. Merlin was born at the wrong end of time and had to live backwards from in front instead of living forwards from behind. In other words, he could remember the future without having any knowledge of what's in the past. This brings us to this thing of planning backwards in management and leadership. Is instead of starting at the beginning and attempting to identify all the steps we need to reach our goal, we can actually project ourselves forward, like I said, pivot ourselves forward and remember what I need to get there, right? I imagine myself having achieved the goal first and then begin identifying steps as I move backwards through time. I'm actually still quoting, Merlin, so I want to make sure I didn't paraphrase it. A couple of quick other interesting quotes. Winston Churchill said, success consists of going from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. So as we are pivoting, we may not always be successful in pivoting all the way to the desired end goal, but that is part of the process of pivoting, because as you're pivoting, you may need to pivot midway as well. So we have to stay open to the possibility of new environmental factors and parameters changing your initial goal. And it's important to kind of integrate that into your process of pivoting going into the future. I'm very fascinated also by Albert Einstein, because as a physicist, knowing that he discovered the theory of relativity and such a complicated physics and math behind it, his motto was let go, be flexible, hang loose. I mean, can you think of that coming from Albert Einstein? And why I love that quote is, in the process of pivoting as well, moving from where we are to where we are going, it's important to stay flexible, be open to new environmental changes that are happening, and be flexible, and to sometimes, let go of the past as well, like the desidera I was talking about. Let a part of ourselves die so we can recreate a new part of ourselves in the future. And like I said, I'm not an expert at this. I'm myself learning and trying to learn how to pivot, learn how to be my best self. To pull it all together, I've talked about tidbits from science, from philosophy, from literature. Pivot is possible at any age and in any circumstance. You just have to stay open to it and be aware that it's possible. Use the reticular activating system. It's part of a mechanism in the brain. It's not something you need to do anything to accomplish. Certainly there are other techniques like meditation that can help in clarifying your thinking, which can help you then focus on your goals. But really, already the hardware is in us. It's in the brain, and we just have to utilize it and reap the benefits. Be where the puck will be. It's a good place to be. Let go, be flexible, hang loose, and let's pivot to our better selves, a better life, and a better career. Got pivot? Thank you.